Did you know that restoring wolves to Yellowstone in the 1990s after they were killed completely in the 1920s completely restored the ecology in terms of rivers, trees, animals, birds, and saved approximately $94 billion in what we would have spent on things to stop climate change? Yeah, I was shocked when I found that out too. But since then, I've done more research. Restoring keystone animals like wolves, beavers, buffalo change everything. And their just natural ways of life restore the habitat quickly and in ways that humans never could. And because the climate change stores the carbon in the land and the water as opposed to the atmosphere, it just naturally helps climate change. Stop forest fires like beavers, restore the clarity to rivers so that fish can live. Anyway, we're going to get into all of that. I am Kerry Blaser, the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene, the divine feminine, and I want to give a louder voice to this movement and this knowledge so that everyone can learn how we can battle climate change together. So first, I'd like to start with a video because it just goes over all the facts. And so let's dive in first, and we're going to find out what the only 14 Canadian wolves initially did at Yellowstone. It's just astronomical. So let's dive in.
What if I told you that 14 wolves changed the course of an entire ecosystem? In 1995, the US government did something that seemed pretty simple. They took 14 Canadian wolves and released them into Yellowstone National Park. What followed wasn't just the restoration of a species, it was the transformation of an entire ecosystem, the revival of a dying landscape, and an economic miracle that would eventually save America $94 billion. But to understand how 14 wolves managed to do all this, we need to go back to when everything started going wrong. Here's an unobtrusive reminder to hit that like button if you're ready for an incredible story about how nature can heal itself in the most unexpected ways. Let's start in the early 1900s. Back then, wolves were seen as nothing but pests, dangerous predators that needed to be eliminated. The US government actually had official wolf killers, people whose job was literally to just shoot, trap, or poison every wolf they could find. And they were really good in Yellowstone had been killed. People celebrated this as a victory. They had no idea what they'd just done. But here's where it gets really interesting. First, everything seemed fine. Sure, there were no wolves, but who needs wolves, right? Wrong. Over the next few decades, things started going terribly wrong, but so slowly that at first nobody noticed. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Without wolves, the elk population exploded, and I mean exploded. By the 1990s, there were about 19,000 elk in Yellowstone's northern range alone. These elk basically turned into living lawnmowers, eating every young tree and bush they could find. Aspen trees, willows, cottonwoods, nothing stood a chance. Saplings would sprout in the spring, and by winter, they'd all be gone. But wait, I hear you asking, couldn't they just hunt the elk to control the population? Well, they tried. But here's something fascinating. Wolves don't just kill elk, they change how elk behave. This is something scientists call the ecology of fear, and it's way more important than anyone realized. When there are no wolves around, elk can just stand in one place, munching away until they've eaten everything. It's like teenagers raiding a refrigerator when their parents are away for the weekend. But with wolves present, elk have to keep moving, stay vigilant, avoid certain areas.
You know, as a reincarnation of Mary Magdalene, I am calling out challenges with manifest destiny, challenges in where Christianity has gone astray. And it was very short-sighted thinking when we had all the Native Americans right next to us who understood that you're in relation with the animals and nature. You don't dominate over it. And there's the wisdom, and wisdom is feminine. And we all complain about the patriarchy. Yeah, about 2,000 years ago, femininity was being suppressed in Europe with the rise of imperialism. You know, we know best. We're going to do it our way. We're going to take over. It's our land, God said. You know, and so I just, be careful with what, God deems and what God says when it comes to being entitled and not taking the time to understand the environment and just coming in. And we brought in cattle and killed a buffalo. It's there's more to
Can't just hang out by rivers and streams all day eating all the young trees. By the early 1990s, Yellowstone was in serious trouble. The park's ecosystem was collapsing, but most visitors had no idea. They'd see the beautiful mountains, the geysers, the elk everywhere, and think everything was perfect. But scientists were watching a different story unfold. The decision to bring back wolves wasn't an easy one. Ranchers fought against it, worried about their livestock. Hunters weren't happy either.
So, they're worried about their livestock. But now we know that livestock, it, grazes and does not produce a healthy ecology, because these cattle come from Europe. Bison are natural to the Americas. So when we have bison on the land, they naturally work with the environment. When we arrived here, there were, millions of beavers and millions of buffalo and this beautiful landscape, and we loved it. We got to have it. So we took it. But that's short-term thinking. That's entitlement. It's not grounded in reality. It's not emotionally
They thought wolves
mature.
would decimate the elk population they relied on. Some locals even spread rumors that the government was planning to release super wolves, specially bred killing machines that would terrorize the entire region. But here's something most people don't know. The wolves chosen for reintroduction were carefully selected. They picked wolves from Canada because these wolves were used to hunting the same prey they'd find in Yellowstone. They choose wolves from different packs to ensure genetic diversity. And get this, they even looked for wolves that had never had conflicts with humans or lions.
They did extensive research and preparation for this to be successful. And as you'll see, it was just phenomenally successful in ways no one could foresee. It even impacted the geyser.
Livestock.
Okay,
The actual reintroduction was like something out of a movie. In January 1995, 14 wolves were brought in, each one carefully sedated and transported in separate crates. The wolves were kept in acclimation pens for several weeks, allowing them to get used to their new home while still being protected. When they were finally released, nobody knew if they'd stay in the park or just run away. Not only did they stay, but they thrived. And this is where the story gets really interesting. Each wolf pack developed its own personality, its own hunting style, even its own family drama that researchers could follow like some wild animal soap opera. Take the Druid Peak Pack, for example. They became the most famous wolf pack in Yellowstone's history. Led by a wolf known as 21M, nicknamed the Gentleman, this pack grew to 37 members, the largest ever recorded in the park. Wolf 21 became legendary not just for his size and strength, but for his unusual behavior. He never killed defeated rivals, adopted orphaned pups, and stayed with the same mate for life. When his mate died, he stopped eating and died shortly after. Even scientists who try to avoid anthropomorphizing animals admitted this was something special. But the wolves didn't just create interesting stories. They started changing everything around them. And I mean everything. Scientists call it a trophic cascade. But really, it was more like ecological dominoes, falling in ways nobody had predicted. First, the elk population started dropping. But not just because wolves were hunting them. The elk actually started behaving differently. They avoided valleys and gorges where they could be easily trapped. They spent
See, animals are intuitive, so they don't fight themselves like we do. I mean, there's so many stories that, like in Florida, when a Category 5 hurricane is approaching, the bears will climb a tree 24 hours before it hits and survive. Where Americans were in our houses on the beaches going, bring it, you know? We can learn a lot from the animals who are intuitive, who intuitively follow their inner guidance. Changing the world is an inside job.
Less time by rivers where wolves could ambush them. This meant that in these areas, young trees could finally grow without being eaten. Within just a few years, new aspen, willow, and cottonwood trees were sprouting up along rivers. But this wasn't just about trees growing. It was the start of something much bigger. Those trees stabilized riverbanks, preventing erosion. This actually changed the rivers themselves. They became less wandering, more stable, and clearer. The changes in Yellowstone's rivers were just the beginning. With more trees along the riverbanks, beavers started coming back. Now, this is where things get really fascinating. In 1995, there was only one beaver colony in the park. By 2012, there were 9. Today, there are so many that scientists have trouble keeping count.
Native Americans always knew this, that they're in relation with the animals, not dominance over. How do we all work together to move forward? I don't want to speak for the Native Americans. I'm not an expert in any way, but what little I do know is that, animals have a soul, we have a soul, and our souls are all connected through energy. Okay, so I'll quote Einstein, the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. So when your field, your energy body, your soul is telling you that you're entitled to things and that you can just dominate and not work with, because that's what your religion and ideology is teaching you, then we see the negative impacts of that. So, we all have a lot to learn here about how to work with other people. And what does assimilation mean? Like, how did Americans try to assimilate with Native Americans who'd lived here for thousands of years and knew the ecosystem and worked with it and thrived? If it's a healthy way of thinking, which of course we didn't know it was then, but we can, now we have more knowledge. What parts of Native American wisdom and knowledge can we integrate in America and then model that for the world and all other countries that have indigenous
And beavers, it turns out, are nature's engineers. Every beaver dam created new wetland habitat. These wetlands attracted more species: frogs, fish, birds, insects, and even otters. The dams also help prevent erosion and filter water, making the rivers cleaner. They even help during droughts by holding water in the landscape longer. But here's something nobody expected. The wolves started affecting the bears. How? Well, when wolves make a kill, they don't eat everything. They leave behind what scientists call wolf kills, basically leftover elk carcasses. These leftovers became a crucial food source for all sorts of animals, including grizzly bears. And it gets even more interesting. Remember those berries I mentioned the elk were eating? With fewer elk around, berry bushes started growing back. More berries meant...
When we trust that nature knows the way, then we see the benefits. Who knew that wolves corralling the elk means that the bears, which do their own work, could, thrive then and bring harmony and balance? Control isn't the way. Trusting our inner guidance, because our souls house all the wisdom and knowledge in the universe. So when we trust our inner guidance, like animals always do, we stay in harmony, we stay in balance.
More food for bears, especially in late summer when they're preparing for hibernation. Scientists found that Yellowstone's grizzly bears now get a significant portion of their diet from berries. Berries that wouldn't exist without wolves. And here's something that will really blow your mind. In 2017, scientists discovered that wolves might even be affecting Yellowstone's supervolcano. Yeah, you heard that right. Before wolves returned, the overgrazing elk were compacting the soil so much that it affected how underground heat dispersed. When wolves changed elk behavior and vegetation started growing back, it actually helped the soil become less compacted. This allowed underground heat to disperse more evenly. Now, this doesn't mean wolves are preventing a volcano.
Bison, which we'll talk about later, impact the soil in much different ways than cattle. So the cattle destroy the ecology because they're not native here, where bison revive the ecology that,
volcanic eruption, but it shows just how deep their influence goes. Literally, scientists studying the park's geothermal features never expected that the return of a predator could affect something as fundamental as how heat moves through the ground. It's just another example of how everything in nature is connected in ways we're still discovering. Even the coyotes were affected, though not in a way they probably appreciated. Before wolves returned, coyotes were the top dog in Yellowstone. They had no competition. But wolves don't like coyotes at all. The wolf pack started killing coyotes and driving them out of certain areas. The coyote population dropped by 50%. This might sound bad, but it had some surprising benefits. With fewer coyotes around, populations of small mammals started increasing. More mice and voles meant more food for hawks, owls, foxes, and weasels. The whole food web became more complex and more stable.
Complexity brings stability. Complexity brings stability.
Now, let's talk about that $94 billion, because this is where the story gets really interesting from an economic perspective. When scientists started calculating the economic benefits of all these changes, they had to consider things nobody had thought about before. First, there's tourism. Wolf watching alone brings in about $35 million per year to the communities around Yellowstone. People come from all over the world just to see these wolves. Some dedicated wolf watchers spend thousands of dollars on special equipment just to observe them from a distance. But that's just the beginning. The recovering forests capture and store carbon dioxide, a service that's worth billions in terms of climate change mitigation. The healthier rivers and streams reduce water treatment costs for surrounding communities. The restored wetlands help prevent flooding and provide natural water storage. And here's something really unexpected. The wolves are even saving money on road maintenance. How? Well, with fewer elk hanging around on riverbanks, there's less erosion. Less erosion means more stable ground, which means roads and bridges last longer and need fewer repairs. But not everything has been perfect.
So I'm going to link the video below, but let me stop sharing here for a minute. I mean, this is a classic example of what happens when we prioritize money and convenience over health and well-being. When it's the juxtapositioning of short-term thinking, lacking wisdom, lacking knowledge and of the area, as opposed to long-term thinking, like, oh, the Native Americans have been here for thousands of years and they know how to work with the environment. Maybe we know something. But we were busy being right, and I've learned that when I was busy being right, I didn't take time to self-reflect. Self-reflection is feminine. There's the wisdom. When we only think action and there's no surrender to the wisdom, then this is what we get. That's what we get when we get the patriarchy. We suppressed femininity 2,000 years ago, which is the wisdom, because we had to grow all this knowledge. It was necessary. We weren't emotionally mature enough yet, but we're here now. And that's why I share my free ebook below. And it will teach you how to self-reflect. And at the end of the video, there'll be a link to my meditation and shamanic drumming video, but you can find it on my YouTube channel because I teach self-led trauma healing. If you want to learn how to heal from your childhood trauma, reparent yourself, recalibrate your nervous system to resonate with love, compassion, and enlightenment instead of fear, guilt, and shame, which makes you super reactive and short-term thinking, entitlement, then check out my free ebook. Use the my meditation and shamanic drumming video. And if you need more help, I got my client services. But let's get back into how this helps our ecological systems, which is, a lot of people talk about climate change, and we did this to ourselves. And so I did some more research on Google. So let me bring up a couple of those search results, and then we'll watch the bison video because it shows how the bison naturally bring back the grasslands and that cattle don't. Let's learn our lessons here. Let me share my screen and so What it says here is the widespread killing of keystone species, specifically bison, beavers, and wolves, have significantly increased atmospheric carbon levels by destroying ecosystems that naturally absorb and store carbon. So, and I'll show below that the projected savings is equal to what the Paris Climate Agreement wanted in a reduction in emissions. So instead of controlling emissions, let's solve the actual problem, which is we destroyed our natural ecosystems, which will store carbon in healthy ways so that we don't destroy our atmosphere. Okay, now of course we didn't know this, but now through science we do know this. So with bison, losing the grassland carbon sink. Let's read this, okay? So when tens of millions of bison were slaughtered, the grasslands lost their primary agent for carbon management. There were like 60 million bison in America and Canada. Went down to like 1,000 around 1900. Anyone wonder what the problem was? Reduce soil carbon. Bison graze, trample, and fertilize in a way that promotes healthy, deep-rooted grass growth, which captures large amounts of carbon in the soil. Okay, so if they're not doing that, the carbon's just going in the atmosphere. Loss of sequestration capacity. Without bison, plant diversity decreases and soil health declines, causing the land to store far less carbon. And because when bison are there, the way they interact with the land and they roll in the land, they create these like wells that stores groundwater. Water stores carbon. And all those grasslands have really deep roots. They need the groundwater. So all of the animal working with the land and the grass, we destroyed that system, and so the carbon goes into the environment, okay? Then let's, look at the beavers, okay? What are the beavers doing here? So beavers are ecosystem engineers who create wetlands, which are among the world's best carbon storage ecosystems. Releasing stored carbon. Beaver dams create ponds that trap carbon-rich sediment and waterlogged wood. This organic matter decays very slowly, keeping carbon trapped. Conversion to dry lands. When beavers were killed, their dams break and wetlands drain, exposing the stored, decayed material to air, which turns it into carbon dioxide. Reducing future storage. The loss of beaver ponds has resulted in a loss of carbon storage equal to millions of tons, with some areas losing up to 2/3 of their carbon storing potential. I mean, that's just the carbon, right? And the beavers do far more in bringing back. I mean, beavers are responsible for providing an ecosystem for 80% of the animals. 80%. That includes amphibians, birds. Okay? They restore the trees. Yes, they got to cut down some trees, but when they cut down the trees, that grows more trees. Okay? So just because one goes down, that means more are, they're intuitive, their soul has all the wisdom and knowledge of the universe, and they don't fight themselves like humans do. Okay, yes, Americans fight themselves, for sure. Okay, wolves, okay? They're the trophic cascades, right? Like we talked about in the last video. As apex predators, wolves regulate herbivore populations, allowing vegetation to grow and store more carbon. Overgrazing by prey in the absence of wolves, populations of herbivores like elk and moose surge, leading to overgrazing of trees, like we saw. Reduce plant biomass. This overgrazing prevents trees from maturing, destroying habitats that act as large carbon sinks. Increase storage with wolves. Wolf reintroduction has been shown to increase carbon storage in forests by enhancing tree biomass. In some scenarios, protecting wolves can aid in sequestering carbon equivalent to 10% of U.S. emissions. I just watched the movie The American President, and they were fighting over between a 20% reduction and a 10% reduction. Why are we even arguing about it? Let's just restore the wolves, Anyway, you can see here, you can, see how I looked at it, but let's look at the other one that I brought up as well and see what more we can learn before we jump into that bison video. Okay. Okay, so keystone animals like beavers, wolves, and certain plants, but also bison, combat flooding, fires, and climate change by acting as ecosystem engineers, physically shaping landscapes to increase water retention, reduce flammable fuels, and boost carbon storage, creating climate-resistant habitats that naturally manage water cycles and mitigate extreme weather impacts. They restore natural processes that buffer against droughts, floods, and wildfires. I live in California, enhancing ecosystem health and resilience. So the dams create all this, the groundwater, and flooding is a lot less likely. Then with all the groundwater, the fires don't go there. And then it houses all that carbon, so it stops climate change, okay? And then wolves help produce that whole environment like we saw in Yellowstone. Once the wolves came back, then the trees started being able to grow. So then the beavers had the trees by the rivers because of the wolves, and then the beavers brought back the amphibians and the dragonflies, and the trees being there brought back the birds. But then the wolves got the coyotes out, which brought back the bunnies and the smaller mammals, which all the birds need to eat. Do you see? You see? It's beautiful. I love it. It's beautiful. Okay, so let's share. I love bison, and I gotta show, this is, my kids went to the Channel, it's the Channel Islands Marine Institute, and there is a herd of bison there in the Channel Islands. They brought them there in the 1920s for a movie, and now they take care of them there. So I'm very connected to the bison, and my grandpa had a buffalo head in his den because he was a very well-trained hunter and fly fisherman who knew how to skin an animal, and he loved the meat. He loved bison meat. He loved venison, deer meat, and fish, and everything. My brother knows how to do that. Okay, so let me share the last video of the buffalo. How bison are saving America's lost prairie, and it'll all be linked below. Here we go.
A long time ago, in the heart of the North American continent, existed a vast sea of tall grasses and millions of bison. This tall grass prairie stretched from Canada to Texas, an area encompassing 14 present-day states. But then, stop me if you've heard this story, Europeans came with their guns and plows, and both the bison and the prairie disappeared. As little as 5% of this original prairie exists today. The largest remaining
5% of the original prairie exists today, and we know that the prairies store carbon. Okay?
Protected area of tallgrass prairie in the entire world is here in northeast Oklahoma. This 40,000-acre expanse is known as the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve. From horizon to horizon, it's all grass.
These grasses they're what we call perennial grasses, so they live year to year, and there have been reports of perennial grasses living as much as 50 years.
Sam Fullendorf studies grassland ecology. He's found these soil and plant communities are surprisingly complex. Some of these grasses' roots reach 15 feet deep, making them a crucial piece of Earth's carbon storage biosphere. And there's more biological diversity here per square meter than in some tropical forests.
We've tried to understand the way this system would have operated historically and restore it as closely as possible.
Before it could be preserved, the prairie had to be restored. You see, it didn't always look like this. Not long ago, this was a cattle ranch. Ranches prioritize economics over ecology, which in practice
Wealth, money, and convenience over health and well-being. Money, convenience.
means putting as many animals on the land as possible for as long as possible. That can lead to destructive overgrazing. So how did this turn into this? It started with this.
These grasslands evolved with grazing. principally by bison. And so if you're trying to put Humpty back together again, you start with some of the bigger pieces, more important pieces. Bison were the primary historical grazer. Boom, let's put those guys back.
Bison were reintroduced to this preserve in 1993. Since that time, the original herd of 300 has grown to upwards of 2,000 animals. These bison love eating grasses and forage for up to 11 hours a day.
They are essentially a stomach with 4 legs.
You'd think all that eating would destroy the prairie, but these grasses evolved to cope with the grazing of migratory bison. In fact, they're actually healthier for it. Grazing bison keeps certain plant species under control and allow others to flourish.
They are kind of ecosystem engineers. And so that's one of the principal reasons we bring them back and reintroduce them to these native prairies.
This preserve is managed by the Nature Conservancy. Today, Bob Hamilton and his team are bringing in the herd for medical checkups. Dogs could get injured, so instead they use trucks to lead the bison into the corral.
You have to always be watching for the ones that are trying to cut and turn and blow past you.
You can have 300 of them going, and all of a sudden one cow tries to dart out, and then the rest of them try to follow, and so you never know. It looks like you're in control, but you're not.
At points, sometimes you and your vehicle are in the middle of this swirl. Yeah, it's just chaos. Like a little bison bomb goes off. One of their really driving behaviors is this: never been domesticated. And one of our policies is to respect as best we can the wildness of that species. Our responsibility, as I see it, to the bison is to maintain their health and kind of their proper impact on the prairie.
So one thing the bison do is the way they interact with the soil. They're much heavier than cattle, and so they unearth seeds, and their excrement really fertilizes the land. And then when they wallow in the dirt, they create these like holes in the land where the water stays. So and cattle don't do that. So based on all of this, that's what restores the prairie, because the prairie grass is really long.
And bison aren't the only thing these prairies need to survive. They also crave fire. Bob's team burns as much as 1/3 of the preserve each year.
So Native Americans learn this over time, that fire is necessary. Fire, while yes, it destroys what's on top, but it gives an opportunity for what's underneath to grow. And so it's like I don't know what the videos, they call it like ice cream for bison. And they would go in there and it would just really revive the land. So it's one way that Native Americans learned to work in unison, in unity with the buffalo, with the bison. You know, we are in relation with. And so that's, one of the reasons they talk about how they needed the bison as to learn how to live and how to live together. It's their whole culture.
That may sound like a lot, but it mimics the ancient seasons of fire that were once common on these prairies.
These native prairies have evolved with fire. If you remove fire from the prairie, it fairly quickly converts to a woodland.
Many people think fire destroys stuff, but in some of the cases of landscapes like this, it eliminates the dormant vegetation and it allows the new growth to do better than it would if the old growth had been there.
So I'll link this video below. But I just love that the Keystone animals, they know what to do. And I heard someone say, if you want to learn how to herd buffalo, figure out where they're going and herd them in that direction. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because they're intuitive. They don't fight themselves. Humans fight. We fight ourselves, and we're learning and we're growing, and we're all in it together. The buffalo soul and the human souls, we're all in it together. And when we work together and learn from each other and respect each other, then anything is possible. That's how we together create heaven on earth. Self-love, acceptance of self. When we accept ourselves, we accept others. When I accept that I'm a soul having a human experience, I can accept that the buffalo is a soul having a buffalo experience, and that we're both souls first and foremost, and that we're in it together. Anyway, Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this was educational for you and that you appreciated it. Please like and subscribe. Take care. Bye.